everyone, this is Miss Sharon from Newcastle Public Library. Glad to see everyone today and welcome to Imagine Their Story. So I have my Apollo 11 shirt on here. I don't know if you can see it, but this week is the anniversary of Apollo 11 and their landing on the moon. So today I want to share Neil Armstrong's story. And this is Don Brown's juvenile biography of him, One Giant Leap, the story of Neil Armstrong. So this is a little bigger bite for a biography, but give it a listen. I think you'll like it. Giant leap, look. There's the phases of the moon. In 1932, 2-year-old Neil Armstrong watched airplanes race. Small, brightly colored planes flashed over Neil and his father, Stephen. The planes raced around a triangle-shaped course, their propellers tearing the sky with a sound that was like an endless thunderclap. The spectacle surely left its mark on young Neil. 4 years later, he leaped at the chance to ride in an airplane. It wasn't on a racing plane, but a 3-motored passenger plane nicknamed the Tin Goose. The plane offered rides at the town airport. It could carry about a dozen people. Neil and his father climbed aboard and buckled themselves into wicker seats. The engine sputtered to life with a terrific noise. The airplane raced down the runway and slowly lifted into the sky. As the ground dropped farther and farther below them, people, houses, cars, and everything looked smaller. The Tin Goose plowed through the clouds as gusts of wind bounced it up and down. The noisy, bumpy ride and ever-tilting view worried Stephen Armstrong. But Neil was fearless. Neil was delighted. Neil started making 10-cent airplane models and reading flying magazines. He also started having a magical dream. In it, he held his breath and hovered above the ground, and below him, people, houses, cars, and everything looked smaller. See, that's a good way to learn about things, that you start making airplanes, then you start reading everything you can find out, magazine articles, books at the library. That's how we learn, by reading and doing research. As Neil grew, so did his interest in flying. Hundreds of model airplanes and stacks of air travel magazines began to appear in his bedroom. A job mowing the mission cemetery lawn helped to pay for it all. At about age 11, Neil worked for a bakery. Because he was small, Neil was placed in the dough mixing vats to clean them. What a job to clean out the dough mixing vats. He dreamed again and again of hovering in the sky, high above the rooftops. There's the cat watching him. When Neil was 13, the Armstrongs moved into a big white house on Benton Street in Wapakoneta, Ohio. Neil had been born in the living room of his grandparents' nearby farm on August 5th, 1930. Neil was shy and made friends carefully. Still, his life was busy. There was school and Boy Scouts. He played baritone horn in the school band and in a group called the Mississippi Moonshiners. He flew rubber band-powered airplanes from a grassy hill, and he worked at the West End Market and Boucher's Hardware, and he swept up and stocked shelves at Rhine and Branding's Pharmacy on Main Street in Wapakoneta, Ohio. On clear nights, Neil climbed to the roof of his neighbor Jacob Zint's garage. Mr. Zint had a homemade telescope mounted there and welcomed visitors to spy the moon and the stars. And on those clear nights, Neil looked and spied the moon and the stars. Few miles from the Armstrongs' home, down the old brewery road, was Port Canetta Airport. Neil went there to watch the planes take off and land. Sometimes people paid him to wash their planes, but watching and washing were not enough. Neil asked his parents if he could learn to fly. The lessons cost $9 an hour. He would have to work 25 hours to earn enough for 1 hour of flying. His parents agreed. Soon afterward, Neil squeezed himself into a tiny Aeronautica Champion airplane with his teacher, Aubrey Newgard. He learned to take off and land. He learned to climb and swoop and bank. He learned to follow a figure-8 path in the sky. He learned that a pilot and an airplane together could be more than the person or the machine was alone. Neil Armstrong earned his student pilot's license on his 16th birthday. He was too young to have an automobile driver's license. In time, Neil Armstrong, student pilot, became Neil Armstrong, Navy fighter pilot in the Korean War. Then he was Neil Armstrong, test pilot, flying rocket-powered airplanes to the upper edges of the sky. And eventually he became Neil Armstrong, astronaut. So student pilot, Navy fighter pilot, test pilot of rocket-powered jets, then astronaut. Astronauts are special pilots who fly spacecraft around Earth. When Neil became an astronaut, there was a plan to land people on the moon and then return them safely to Earth. The moon had gripped people's imaginations for thousands of years. On July 16th, 1969, astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Mike Collins sat in a cramped capsule atop a Saturn rocket. The Saturn was as big as an office building and powerful enough to fling 3 people more than 200,000 miles to the moon. Can you imagine? I can't even imagine. At 9:32 a.m., the main rocket motors erupted. Flames spewed from the Saturn's tail as it lifted from the ground. Soon the first set of engines exhausted their fuel and fell toward the ocean. Smaller engines sprang to life and sent the capsule circling the globe. After 2 turns around Earth, a final rocket engine blasted the capsule to 25,000 miles an hour, and they hurtled toward the moon. Neil, Buzz, and Mike sped through black space for 4 days. The sun's light was broiling hot. The shadows were brutally cold. To prevent one side of the capsule from becoming overheated or frozen, it was turned slowly, like a hot dog on a grill. The astronauts called it the barbecue roll. Turning slowly like a hot dog on a grill. How about that? When they reached the moon, Neil and Buzz entered a special spacecraft designed to part from the main capsule and land on the moon. Mike remained aboard the main capsule to pilot it as the other 2 astronauts dropped to the moon's surface. A computer guided Neil and Buzz, but as they neared landing, Neil saw that there were large boulders in their way. He took control of the craft and slipped it over the obstacles. While he searched for a safer place to land, an alarm blared, warning that they were low on fuel. With only seconds of fuel remaining, Neil safely lowered the hovering spacecraft to the moon's surface. Earthlings Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin had finally reached the moon. Could you imagine going down to the moon in that lunar lander and the first ones to land on the moon. Wearing spacesuits and helmets, they opened the hatch of the spacecraft. Before them was the moon, magnificent and empty. Neil climbed down a ladder and hopped to the ground. Special cameras allowed 600 million people on Earth to watch and listen. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, Neil said into his microphone. He gathered moon rocks for scientists to study later. As he worked, his boots left marks in the dust. Neil's footprints may remain there for 1,000,000 years. There is no wind, no rain, and no snow on the moon to disturb them. Buzz climbed down the ladder and stepped onto the moon's surface. Earth hung above them in a perfectly black sky. North Africa could be seen behind swirling white clouds. Neil shuffled over the powdery surface toward Buzz. The sun shone with a bright white light. They were walking on the moon. Neil stood next to Buzz. Their helmets almost touched. Buzz grinned broadly, and Neil clasped his hand on his partner's shoulder. "Isn't this fun?" Neil said. It would be fun if that's all you wanted to do from the time you were a little kid. It's a dream coming true. On July 20th, 1969, that's today, July 20th, Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon and became a hero to millions of people. But inside him was the memory of an ordinary boy from Wapakoneta, Ohio, a boy who loved books and music, a boy who was shy and who made friends carefully, a boy who dreamed of hanging in the air suspended by only a trapped breath. Neil Armstrong, a boy who followed his dreams. Imagine their story. Imagine Neil Armstrong's story. So to find out more about Neil Armstrong, we have several biographies. There's Zoom In series on pioneering explorers. And this is by Jennifer Strand. There's also books on Mae Jemison, another groundbreaking astronaut, Lewis and Clark, Jacques Cousteau. There's other folks in this series. Buzz Aldrin, Reaching for the Moon, paintings by Wendell Miner. This is an autobiography that Buzz Aldrin wrote. There's the painting of the launch. I had mentioned Mae Jemison before. This is that Pioneering Explorers book on Mae Jemison. And a wonderful biography illustrated by Rhoda Ahmed, Mae Among the Stars. This tells Mae Jemison's story and how she wanted to do very much like Neil Armstrong, that she was always fascinated with space and she wanted to follow her dream as well. Mae Among the Stars. So a bit of nonfiction too, if you want to know about the moon landings and the Apollo 11, Brian Flocka's Moonshot tells the story of the flight of the Apollo 11. This won the Seibert Award. And Michael Collins wrote, "Reading Moonshot gave me the feeling I was back up in space." So Michael Collins, the pilot of Apollo 11. So my friends, check out these stories of other astronauts. It's fascinating, fascinating. NASA's website is wonderful. There's so many like field trips you can take to the different space centers, Lewis Research, the Johnson Space Center, and Cape Canaveral in Florida. So check out NASA. Find out more about some of the astronauts and how they studied. If you're interested in pursuing that career, see what you need to learn, read everything you can to find out about it. So my friends, imagine their story, and then you know what, start writing your own story. So this is Miss Sharon from Newcastle Public Library, wishing you a wonderful Wednesday, and thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.